I can't believe you sold our family estate to your secretary for $1, I said, watching my husband load his golf clubs into her Tesla. Legally it's hers now, he sneered. I sipped my wine, hiding a smile. He'd forgotten the prenup clause about infidelity forfeitures, and that the secretary was my divorce attorney's niece. I can't believe you sold our family estate to your secretary for $1, I said, watching my husband load his golf clubs into her Tesla. The morning sun glinted off the sleek vehicle, almost as blindingly as the rage building inside me. Zayn didn't even bother turning around. Legally it's hers now, he sneered, carefully arranging his prized Callaway set in Isabella's trunk while she stood nearby, keys dangling from her manicured fingers. I sipped my wine slowly, the rich Cabernet a stark contrast to the bitter taste of betrayal in my mouth. My hand trembled slightly, but I maintained my composure, hiding the smile that threatened to emerge. Let him think he'd won. Let him believe I was destroyed. He'd forgotten the prenup clause about infidelity forfeitures, and that the secretary was my divorce attorney's niece. It's a little early for wine, isn't it, Lucia? Isabella remarked with false concern, her 20-something face a portrait of practiced innocence. When your husband of 15 years sells your home out from under you, there's no wrong time for wine, I replied, raising my glass in a mock toast. The crystal caught the light, a wedding gift from Zayn's mother, who had warned me with a tight smile that Miller men always get what they want. Before we begin, if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted, this story is for you. Hit subscribe, it's free and you'll never miss these tales of justice served. Now, let me show you how I turned my husband's arrogance into his ultimate downfall. Zayn slammed the trunk shut, the sound echoing across the circular driveway of the colonial estate that had been in his family for generations. I remembered the first time I'd seen it, overwhelmed by its grandeur, never imagining it would become both my home and my prison. We're heading to Pebble Beach for the weekend, Zayn announced, not bothering to look me in the eye. Don't bother calling. The movers will be here Monday. I nodded, taking another sip of wine. Have a wonderful time. As their car disappeared down the long tree-lined driveway, I allowed myself to collapse onto the front steps, memories flooding back unbidden. I met Zayn Miller 16 years ago at a university fundraiser for the local college where I worked in the alumni office. He'd donated a substantial sum and was being honored that evening. When he approached me at the reception, I was struck by his confidence. The easy way he carried himself, the product of old money and entitlement. You don't seem impressed by me, he'd said, handing me a glass of champagne. Should I be? I'd replied, accepting the drink but maintaining eye contact. He'd laughed then, genuinely delighted by my response. Everyone else here is. I hadn't planned to fall for him. At 32 I'd built a modest but satisfying life for myself. But Zayn was persistent, charming, and seemed refreshingly straightforward compared to other men I'd dated. Our whirlwind romance culminated in a proposal just 3 months later. We'll be partners in everything, he'd promised, slipping a family heirloom ring onto my finger. Equal in all things. The wedding was elaborate but tasteful, held on the estate's grounds. His mother had fussed over every detail, subtly reshaping my ideas until the celebration hardly resembled what I'd envisioned. I'd conceded, believing it was a one-time compromise. I didn't realize it was just the beginning. The changes were so gradual I barely noticed them. First, Zayn suggested combining our bank accounts for simplicity. Then he recommended I quit my job when he received a promotion. You don't need to work anymore, he'd said, as if offering a gift rather than removing my independence. By our 5th anniversary, he was making all financial decisions without consultation. By our 10th, I needed permission to make purchases beyond groceries. The partnership he'd promised had evolved into something unrecognizable, a gilded cage that grew smaller each year. I rose from the steps and walked back into the house, my footsteps echoing in the grand foyer. I wandered into Zayn's study, running my fingers over the mahogany desk where he'd first introduced Isabella as my new secretary 8 months ago. I'd noticed the changes immediately. Zayn coming home later, the lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume, the secretive phone calls. He grew careless with receipts. Dinner for 2 at restaurants we'd never visited together, hotel charges in the city despite claiming late nights at the office. There was the jewelry, a delicate bracelet I discovered in his jacket pocket that never appeared on my wrist. The weekend business trips, that coincided with Isabella's absences from the office. 3 months ago I'd started documenting everything. The late nights. The lies about his whereabouts that were easily disproven. The money transferring from our joint accounts to unknown destinations. The breaking point came last Tuesday. Zayn had left for work in a hurry, forgetting to lock his briefcase. I'd never snooped before, respecting boundaries even as he dismantled mine. But something, intuition perhaps, prompted me to open it. Inside, beneath quarterly reports and business proposals, lay a manila folder containing draft divorce papers. My name was highlighted throughout the document, along with notations about minimal settlement requirements and asset protection strategies. I remember standing in his study, papers trembling in my hands as 15 years of marriage crystallized into one devastating realization. I had never been a partner. I had been an acquisition, and now I was being liquidated. That night I called Sarah, my college roommate who'd become a family law attorney. We hadn't spoken in years. Another casualty of Zayn's subtle isolation tactics. "Lucia?" she'd answered, surprise evident in her voice. "Is everything okay?" "No," I'd admitted, my voice breaking for the first time. "But it will be." We met for coffee the next morning, Sarah's professional demeanor softening when she saw my face. "You look like you haven't slept," she observed, ordering me a stronger drink than I'd requested. "I've been awake 15 years, I replied. "I'm just finally seeing clearly." As I detailed the situation, Sarah's expression shifted from concern to determination. When I mentioned Isabella, she paused, a strange look crossing her face. "Isabella Morgan," she clarified. "Mid-20s, drives a Tesla, blonde with a small rose tattoo on her wrist?" My stomach dropped. "You know her." Sarah's smile was slow and calculating. "She's my partner's niece. And I think we might have an interesting opportunity here." Now, walking through the empty house, I felt a strange combination of grief and liberation. The estate had never truly felt like mine, always existing as a monument to the Miller family legacy rather than a home we built together. I walked to our bedroom, my bedroom, and opened the closet door. Behind Zayn's meticulously organized suits hung a safe he thought I didn't know about. I carefully entered the combination, our wedding date, his vanity making him predictable, and retrieved the prenuptial agreement we'd signed. I flipped to the clause Sarah had highlighted, reading the words that would become Zayn's undoing. In the event of infidelity by either party, all assets acquired before and during the marriage shall be forfeited to the wronged spouse, including familial properties and holdings. I closed the safe, a genuine smile forming on my lips. Sometimes the finest print contained the most important details. I placed the prenup agreement back in the safe, my mind already calculating the next steps. The clause was my ammunition, but I needed strategy and precision to make it count. Zayn was too powerful, too connected to take down without perfect execution. The next morning, I drove to a modest office building on the outskirts of town where Sarah had arranged for me to meet her colleague Andrea Bennett. Unlike the gleaming downtown skyscraper that housed Zayn's legal team, this place was understated but purposeful, much like Andrea herself. "The infidelity clause is unusual," Andrea said, tapping her pen against the copy of our prenup. Her office was small but meticulously organized, diplomas from Harvard Law displayed without ostentation. Especially for old money families. They typically protect assets regardless of behavior. Zayn thought it was romantic, I explained, remembering his smug smile as he'd added the clause. He said it showed how committed he was to fidelity. In reality, I think he enjoyed the performative gesture, knowing he'd never be caught. Andrea leaned forward. "But you have evidence?" "Not enough." "Not yet." She nodded, eyes calculating. "Then we build a case. Fully. Carefully. Document everything. Meetings, overnight stays, gifts. Bank statements showing suspicious withdrawals. Create a timeline. Meanwhile, we'll need to understand your complete financial situation." The words hit like a physical blow. "I don't know our complete financial situation." Andrea's expression softened slightly. "That's not uncommon, Lucia. But it's our first hurdle." Over the next hour, we created a list of documents I needed to find: tax returns, investment portfolios, property deeds. I realized with growing horror how completely I'd surrendered financial awareness to Zayn. "He's isolated you," Andrea observed as I struggled to name even one of our investment accounts. Financially, socially, it follows a pattern. Who else besides Sarah do you still connect with regularly? The question hung in the air as I mentally scrolled through names. My college friends had gradually disappeared from my life. My cousin Maria, once like a sister, now reduced to Christmas cards. Even my book club had disbanded years ago when Zayn repeatedly scheduled conflicts on meeting nights. I didn't notice it happening, I whispered, shame coloring my cheeks. He always had reasonable explanations. The couple we used to vacation with, he said Jim had made an inappropriate comment about me. My friend Diane? He claimed she was jealous of our lifestyle and it was making her bitter. Andrea's gaze was steady, non-judgmental. Isolation is a control tactic, Lucia. But it works in our favor now. Zayn thinks you have no support system. He's underestimating you. I left Andrea's office with a burner phone she provided and a renewed sense of purpose. The humiliation of my situation was still there, but it was hardening into something else. Determination. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a detective in my own marriage. While Zayn was at work, I photographed financial documents, downloaded bank statements, and created copies of tax returns. I discovered offshore accounts I'd never known existed and property holdings in 3 states. The more I uncovered, the more I recognized the true extent of Zayn's deception. We weren't just wealthy, we were rich beyond what he'd ever disclosed to me. And he'd been moving money, significant amounts, into accounts under only his name for years. Tracking the affair proved easier than expected. Zayn had grown careless, confident in my complacency. I photographed them leaving hotels together. I recorded Isabella's car in our driveway when I was supposedly at yoga classes Zayn had encouraged me to take. I even managed to clone his phone during one of his heavy sleep cycles after a night of drinking, giving me access to their text exchanges. Missing you already, Isabella had written after one afternoon rendezvous. Your wife doesn't deserve you. She doesn't challenge me like you do, Zayn had replied. Just a few more weeks of paperwork and we're free. Reading their exchanges made me physically ill, but I documented everything meticulously, uploading evidence to a secure cloud account Andrea had created. Each piece was another nail in the coffin of Zayn's arrogance. The hardest part was maintaining the facade. I continued preparing Zayn's favorite meals, asking about his day, pretending not to notice the lipstick stain on his collar or the way he'd shower immediately upon returning home. I smiled through his transparent lies about working late when I had photographic evidence of him and Isabella entering her apartment. You seem different lately, Zayn remarked one evening as I poured his scotch exactly how he liked it. More agreeable. I passed him his drink, my fingers brushing his. I'm just trying to appreciate what we have, I said, the double meaning my private victory. The following Tuesday I stopped at Maple Street Coffee, a small cafe far from our usual haunts, needing space to review notes before meeting Andrea. I was scanning bank statements when a familiar voice ordered at the counter. Oat milk lot extra hot light foam. I looked up to see Isabella, her back to me, tapping impatiently on her phone. I quickly gathered my papers, preparing to leave, when she turned and our eyes met. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by something unexpected. Not guilt but calculation. She approached my table with confident strides. Mrs. Miller, she said. What a surprise. Isabella, I acknowledged, struggling to maintain composure. I don't usually come to this part of town. Neither do I, she replied, sliding uninvited into the seat across from me. Except when visiting family. I maintained a neutral expression despite my racing heart. Family. My aunt and uncle live nearby. You might know my aunt actually. Isabella stirred her latte, watching me carefully. Diane Matthews? The name hit like a thunderbolt. Diane, my former best friend. The woman Zayn had systematically removed from my life with claims of her resentment and toxicity. Diane is your aunt? I managed, mind racing with implications. Isabella's smile was enigmatic. Small world, isn't it? He speaks very highly of you. Or did, before you cut her out of your life. I sat frozen, pieces clicking into place. This wasn't coincidence. Isabella working for Zayn, the affair, the property transfer. Suddenly everything took on a new dimension. This isn't what you think, Isabella said softly, reading my expression. But we should talk. Not here. Not now. She slid a napkin across the table with an address written on it. Tomorrow. 2 o'clock. Before I could respond, she was gone, leaving me with questions multiplying by the second and the distinct feeling that the game was far more complex than I had imagined. I stared at the napkin in my hand, Isabella's handwriting neat and deliberate. The address was for a small park on the edge of town. Public enough to be safe, secluded enough for a private conversation. My mind raced through possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Was this a trap? A confession? Some bizarre attempt at manipulation? Sleep eluded me that night. I lay beside Zayn, listening to his even breathing, wondering how someone so familiar could have become such a stranger. Morning brought no clarity. I moved through my routine mechanically, waiting for Zayn to leave for an important client meeting that I knew was just another rendezvous with Isabella. "Don't wait up," he called over his shoulder, not even bothering to fabricate a convincing lie anymore. At precisely 2 o'clock I arrived at the designated park. Isabella sat on a bench near a small pond, looking nothing like the polished secretary who'd been parading around my home. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a sweater. She looked younger, more vulnerable. "You came," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Explain," I replied, remaining standing. "Now. Diane is my mother's sister. When I was applying for jobs after college, she told me about you, her best friend who'd married into the Miller family and then vanished from her life." Isabella's eyes held mine steadily. She always wondered what happened. "So you deliberately sought out a job with my husband? To what? Spy on me?" The betrayal felt fresh, another layer of manipulation in an already tangled web. Isabella shook her head. "I applied to Miller Financial Group because they were hiring and paying well. Meeting Zayn, becoming his secretary, that was coincidence. But once I realized who he was, who you were..." She paused. "Let's just say I started noticing things. Like the fact he was pursuing you?" I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "Like the fact he's been embezzling from his clients, including my father," Isabella countered, her voice hardening. "Like the fact he's been moving assets before divorcing you. Like the fact he's been contacting hitmen on the dark web." The last statement hit me like a physical blow. "What?" Isabella pulled out her phone, showing me screenshots of conversations from Zayn's computer. Conversations she documented while working late at his office. The content was chilling. Inquiries about permanent solutions and untraceable accidents. "He doesn't just want to divorce you, Lucia. He wants to eliminate you." The divorce papers are his cover, making it look like he was planning a legal separation if anything happens to you. My legs gave way and I sank onto the bench beside her. "Why would he? We have a prenup. He could just divorce me." "Because of the infidelity clause," Isabella explained. "Sarah showed it to my aunt who showed it to me. If he divorces you and you prove infidelity, he loses everything, including assets he's hidden from you. But if you die in an accident before any divorce proceedings, he keeps it all," I finished, cold realization washing over me. "And you, what's your role in this? Why the affair? Why accept the property transfer?" Isabella's expression turned grim. "To protect you and to gather evidence. Everything I've done has been documented and shared with Andrea Bennett. Every meeting, every inappropriate advance, every financial discussion. The property transfer was his idea. He thinks I'm besotted with him, willing to participate in his schemes." My mind struggled to process this information. "How do I know I can trust you?" "You don't," she acknowledged. "But I'm your best chance at stopping him before he does something irreversible." He handed me a flash drive. "This contains everything: financial records, communications, evidence of his affair, and the discussions about arranging your accident. Andrea has copies too." I turned the small device over in my hand, this tiny repository of my husband's true nature. Why? Why help me? For Aunt Diane, who lost her best friend. For my father, whose retirement Zayn stole. And maybe, she admitted, because I hate seeing another woman manipulated by a man who thinks his money makes him untouchable. Over the next hour, Isabella outlined an elaborate plan. One that would use Zayn's arrogance and assumptions against him. We would let him believe his scheme was working. Isabella would continue the pretense of their affair while documenting everything. I would play the devastated wife, unaware of the danger and focused only on the humiliation of his infidelity. The key is timing, Isabella explained. We need him to believe he's won before we reveal our hand. As we finalized details, my mind drifted back to our wedding day, specifically, to the prenuptial agreement that now stood as my primary protection. I'd been the one to suggest the infidelity clause, not out of insecurity but as a symbol of our commitment. If we're truly partners, I'd told Zayn as we sat in his family's attorney's office, then being faithful isn't a burden, it's a promise. Zayn had laughed, amused by what he perceived as romantic naivety. Add it in, he'd told the lawyer, signing the document with a flourish. Though neither of us will ever need it. His smugness that day matched the expression he wore now when discussing our impending separation. Absolute confidence in his own cleverness, blind to the possibility of failure. Returning home after my meeting with Isabella, I found Zayn in his study, scotch in hand despite the early hour. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Thinking," I replied honestly. "About what happens next?" Something like pity crossed his face. "You should focus on packing, Lucia. The estate transfer is already processed. Isabella's name is on the deed." I let my shoulders slump, forcing tears to my eyes. "Why her, Zayn? What did I do wrong?" He set down his glass, seemingly pleased by my apparent distress. "Nothing specific. You're just predictable, comfortable. Isabella challenges me. Understands the world I operate in." I nodded, letting a tear track down my cheek while mentally cataloging each word for future evidence. "I see. Don't worry," he said, his tone falsely generous. "I'll make sure you have enough to live on. A small apartment in town, perhaps. Nothing extravagant but sufficient." The casual cruelty, the complete dismissal of our 15 years together, strengthened my resolve. Each day that followed required an exhausting performance. Appearing broken while secretly coordinating with Andrea and Isabella, documenting Zayn's every move and maintaining my facade of ignorance. Nights were the hardest. Lying beside the man who was plotting my death, pretending to sleep while hyper-aware of his every movement. During the day I watched him dismantle our shared life, selling artwork I'd chosen, closing accounts I'd helped build, all while treating me with increasing contempt, secure in his belief that I was powerless. "You're barely eating," he observed one evening, something predatory in his gaze. "You should take care of yourself, Lucia. Your health is important." The double meaning wasn't lost on me. I smiled weakly and forced myself to take a bite of the meal I'd prepared, wondering if he'd already begun attempts to poison me. From that day forward I prepared separate portions, switching plates when he wasn't looking. The constant vigilance was draining, but beneath the fear and exhaustion, something else was growing. A steely determination I hadn't known I possessed. Zayn had underestimated me for 15 years. Soon he would understand the cost of that mistake. 3 weeks after discovering Zayn's lethal intentions, I stood in our kitchen reviewing the final documents Isabella had secretly forwarded me. The property transfer was indeed complete on paper. Our family estate now legally belonged to Isabella Morgan for the sum of $1. The absurdity of the transaction might have been almost comical if the stakes weren't so high. "The transfer is official," Andrea had confirmed during our last meeting. "But it's the smoking gun we needed. No judge will uphold a transaction this blatantly fraudulent, especially combined with the evidence of infidelity and the prenup provisions. Taking this calculated risk, allowing the transfer to proceed rather than fighting it immediately, had been the hardest decision. Every instinct screamed to protect what was mine, yet strategic patience would ultimately serve me better. "He's hosting a dinner party tomorrow night," I told Andrea during that same meeting. "Board members, colleagues, friends. He's even invited Isabella." Andrea had raised an eyebrow. "Bold move." "He's flaunting it," I replied, making his intentions clear without explicitly announcing them yet. "But I think it's an opportunity." That opportunity now loomed before me as I prepared our home for Zayn's 12 dinner guests, many of whom had no idea they were about to become witnesses to his downfall. I moved through our dining room with practiced precision, arranging the silverware just as Zayn's mother had taught me years ago. Each knife, fork, and crystal glass placed with meticulous attention to protocol and tradition. "The flowers are too bright," Zayn remarked, entering the room and eyeing my arrangements with disdain. "This isn't a celebration, Lucia. I removed several vibrant blooms from the centerpiece without comment, though inside I seethed. Of course it wasn't a celebration for me, it was my execution dinner. What Zayn didn't realize was that I'd invited a few guests of my own, with his unwitting approval. I added Sarah Thompson to the guest list, he mentioned casually. I know you two were close once. Thought you might appreciate having an old friend here for support. The calculated cruelty of the gesture was breathtaking. Inviting my former friend to witness my humiliation. What Zayn didn't know was that Sarah's presence was exactly what we needed. A credible witness with legal expertise who could later testify to his behavior. As guests arrived, I played my part flawlessly, the gracious but slightly subdued hostess, offering drinks and making small talk while Zayn commanded the room. Isabella arrived fashionably late, drawing every eye as she entered in a dress that seemed specifically designed to contrast with my more conservative attire. Isabella. Zayn greeted her too warmly for a boss, his hand lingering at the small of her back. So glad you could join us. I caught Sarah's sharp intake of breath beside me, her eyes darting between Zayn and Isabella, then to me with a question I answered with the slightest shake of my head. Not yet. Dinner proceeded with excruciating slowness. I served each course with perfect timing, filled wine glasses, and maintained polite conversation while Zayn grew increasingly bold with his attentions toward Isabella. I'm thinking of taking a sabbatical, he announced over dessert, his hand now openly covering Isabella's on the table. Perhaps travel for a few months. Europe maybe. How lovely, remarked Caroline Dutton, wife of Zayn's business partner. Will you be joining him, Lucia? Before I could respond, Zayn laughed. Oh, I think Lucia will be quite busy settling into her new circumstances. The table fell uncomfortably silent, tension thickening the air. New circumstances? Prompted James Dutton, his expression concerned. Zayn gestured expansively, wine sloshing dangerously in his glass. Change is inevitable, isn't it? Some things must end for others to begin. His gaze settled on Isabella, who smiled back with perfectly feigned adoration. Zayn has been mentoring me, she offered innocently. Teaching me everything about managing significant assets. Including this estate, Zayn added, his smile turning cruel as he looked my way. Isabella has quite a talent for acquisition. I dropped a dessert spoon, the clatter against fine china drawing all eyes to me. Forgive me, I murmured, bending to retrieve it. How clumsy. Sarah's hand found mine under the table and squeezed briefly, support and warning in one gesture. Not yet. Let him continue. In fact, Zayn continued, emboldened by alcohol and arrogance, Isabella has already secured this property. Quite the negotiator. Audible gasps circled the table. Caroline Dutton's eyes widened in shock, while her husband's narrowed in suspicion. You sold your family estate? James asked carefully. Transferred ownership, Zayn corrected, enjoying the drama. New blood, new vision for an old property. Isabella has excellent taste. And what will happen to Lucia? Sarah asked, her voice perfectly calibrated to sound merely concerned rather than gathering evidence. Zayn waved dismissively. She'll be provided for. Modestly. Isabella leaned forward, her expression earnest. I've suggested documenting the entire arrangement. For transparency. She turned to Zayn. In fact, I brought those forms I mentioned. We could sign them tonight with everyone as witnesses. It was masterfully done. Isabella was encouraging Zayn to create even more documentation of his fraudulent actions, in front of credible witnesses, while appearing to be the thoughtful, responsible party. Zayn, too intoxicated by both wine and power to recognize the trap, beamed with approval. Excellent idea. I love your thoroughness. While Isabella retrieved documents from her purse, I excused myself to the kitchen, needing a moment to compose myself. The walls of our home, soon to be reclaimed as mine alone, seemed to pulse with the tension of what was unfolding. During these painful weeks, I'd been quietly preparing for independence. Each day while Zayn was at work, I'd selected small, meaningful items. My grandmother's recipe book, photo albums, personal jewelry, and relocated them to a safe location. I'd reconnected with friends Zayn had driven away, rebuilding a support network he'd spent years dismantling. I'd also been transferring skills back into my name. The gardening subscriptions I'd maintained for years. The utilities I'd managed while Zayn focused on more important matters. Small things that would make transition to independence smoother. Returning to the dining room with coffee, I found Zayn proudly signing Isabella's documents with a theatrical flourish. His signature, bold and oversized as always, creating yet another piece of evidence against him. Witnessed and documented, he announced, looking around the table at the uncomfortable faces of our guests. His eyes found mine, seeking the devastation he expected to see. I offered him only a placid smile and poured his coffee exactly as he liked it. 3 days later, Zayn packed his bags for what he claimed was a business trip, but was obviously his planned escape with Isabella. I stood in the driveway watching him load his prized golf clubs into her Tesla. The same scene that had begun this chapter of our story. "I suppose this is goodbye," he said, not bothering to mask his satisfaction. "The movers will clear the rest of my things while I'm away." "You're really leaving," I said, allowing my voice to tremble slightly. "After 15 years. He checked his watch impatiently. "It's been over for much longer than that, Lucia. We both know it." "I guess I just didn't want to see it," I replied, the half-truth bitter on my tongue. Zayn smiled, triumphant in what he believed was his ultimate victory. "That was always your problem. You never saw what was right in front of you." As he slid into Isabella's passenger seat, his expression was one of absolute confidence. A man who believed he had successfully orchestrated his own freedom while condemning me to poverty or worse. I sipped my wine, hiding my smile as they drove away. He was right about one thing. I hadn't seen what was right in front of me for years. But now I saw everything with perfect clarity. I savored the silence of the empty house for exactly 48 hours before setting our plan in motion. The estate felt different already. Lighter somehow, as if Zayn's departure had lifted a weight I'd grown so accustomed to carrying that I'd forgotten it was there. On the morning of the 3rd day I called Andrea. "It's time." The process moved with startling efficiency. By noon papers were filed. By 3 o'clock, Zayn was being served at the luxury resort where he and Isabella were staying, their romantic getaway interrupted by a court officer with impeccable timing. I wasn't there to witness it in person, but Isabella described it later in vivid detail. Zayn lounging by the pool, drink in hand, when the officer approached. The confusion on his face as he accepted the envelope. The dawning horror as he read the contents. Divorce papers citing infidelity, accompanied by photographs, text messages and witness statements, all culminating in a petition to invoke the infidelity clause of our prenuptial agreement. His first call wasn't to a lawyer. It was to me. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded when I answered, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Reading the fine print," I replied calmly. "Something you should have done more carefully. This is ridiculous. You have no proof." "Page 16 of the filing," I interrupted. "There's a particularly interesting photo of you entering the Westlake Hotel on March 12th. The same day you told me you were in Chicago." A beat of silence, then, "These photos could be anyone from anywhere. The metadata is intact. Time-stamped, geotagged. Your watch is visible in 3 of them, the one I gave you for our 10th anniversary. Rather distinctive." Another silence, longer this time. "You're bluffing." "Page 22. I continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Text messages. My particular favorite is from April 7th, where you discuss, rather explicitly, what you plan to do when you're finally rid of the dead weight." I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "You hacked my phone? That's illegal." "No more illegal than planning your wife's murder," I countered softly. The sharp intake of breath on the other end told me everything. "What are you talking about?" Page 37. Screenshots of your dark web communications. The Bitcoin transfers. The conversations about permanent solutions and untraceable accidents. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You can't prove those are from me. The FBI disagrees. They're particularly interested in the financial transactions. Something about wire fraud across state lines." The line went silent for so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, with renewed confidence, "None of this matters. The estate is no longer in my name. Isabella is my star witness," I finished for him. "Did you really think she'd choose you over her own family? You've been played, Zayn. Quite masterfully, I might add." The preliminary hearing was scheduled with unusual speed. thanks to the evidence of potential physical threat. I sat across from Zayn in the courtroom, meeting his glare with a serenity that seemed to infuriate him further. He'd assembled an impressive legal team, 5 attorneys in expensive suits flanking him like a protective barrier. I had Andrea, Sarah, and Isabella seated beside me. Quality over quantity. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who'd seen every trick in the book, reviewed our filings with methodical care. When she reached the section detailing the property transfer, she looked up, her gaze sharp. "Mr. Miller, you transferred a family estate valued at approximately $12 million to Ms. Morgan for $1? Zayn's lead attorney leaned forward. "Your Honor, that transaction was a legitimate gift between an employer and his secretary with whom he was having an extramarital affair," the judge finished dryly, "while actively planning to divorce his wife of 15 years. The transfer was completed legally," the attorney insisted. "All paperwork was filed correctly." "Actually," Isabella spoke up, her voice clear in the hushed courtroom, "I never signed the actual deed transfer. The documents Mr. Miller signed at the dinner party were acknowledgments that the property was being transferred fraudulently to circumvent the prenuptial agreement." Zayn's face drained of color as Isabella slid a document across to the judge. "This is my sworn affidavit detailing Mr. Miller's instructions to me regarding the property transfer, along with recordings of our conversations about his intentions." The judge reviewed the document, her expression hardening. "Ms. Morgan, you were acting as an informant? After discovering Mr. Miller's embezzlement from my father's accounts and his discussions about arranging an accident for his wife, yes." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Zayn's attorney called for a recess, which the judge granted. As they huddled in desperate consultation, I caught Zayn staring at me with naked hatred, and beneath it something I'd never seen from him before: fear. When proceedings resumed, Zayn's legal strategy had visibly shifted from aggressive offense to damage control. His attorney now spoke of misunderstandings and exaggerated concerns, offering generous settlement terms that would have seemed miraculous weeks ago. The judge was unmoved. "The court finds sufficient evidence to freeze all assets pending full investigation of both the fraud allegations and the potential criminal charges regarding conspiracy to commit murder." Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt a strange lightness, not triumph exactly, but the first tentative steps toward reclaiming my life. The full divorce proceedings took months, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The infidelity clause was invoked, nullifying any claim Zayn had to our joint assets. The property transfer was invalidated. The criminal investigation into his darker plans continued separately, ensuring he wouldn't threaten me again. More meaningful than the material victory was my internal transformation. Each day brought small reclamations of self, redecorating rooms to my taste, inviting friends over without anxiety, making financial decisions confidently. I reconnected with my cousin Maria, who cried when I called. "I thought you didn't want me in your life anymore," she admitted. "Never," I assured her. "That was Zayn's doing, not mine." Diane and I rebuilt our friendship slowly, carefully. The pain of her perceived abandonment hadn't disappeared overnight, but understanding Zayn's manipulation gave us a foundation for healing. 6 months after that first courtroom appearance, I converted the east wing of the estate into a women's resource center, providing legal assistance and financial education for those experiencing situations similar to mine. The irony of using Zayn's family home for this purpose wasn't lost on me, but it felt like poetic justice, transforming a symbol of control into a source of empowerment. On a warm evening exactly 1 year after Zayn had loaded his golf clubs into Isabella's Tesla, she joined me on the estate's wide front porch. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. "He was sentenced today," Isabella said finally, swirling her wine thoughtfully. 8 years for the financial crimes. They couldn't make the conspiracy charges stick. I nodded, surprised by my lack of emotion at the news. "It's enough." "Do you ever regret it?" she asked after another comfortable silence. "Marrying him, I mean." I considered the question carefully. "No. I regret losing myself in the marriage, but not the experience itself. I wouldn't be who I am now without it." Isabella smiled, raising her glass. "To fine print and fresh starts." I clinked my glass against hers, returning her smile. and to reading the whole document before signing. The setting sun cast long shadows across the lawn. The same lawn where I'd once stood watching my husband drive away with another woman, believing he'd won. How differently things had unfolded from what either of us had imagined that day. I took another sip of wine, savoring its complexity. Life, like good wine, had layers and notes that revealed themselves slowly. Sometimes bitter, sometimes sweet, but always worth experiencing fully. The estate around us no longer felt like a gilded cage or even a prize to be won. It had become something more valuable. A home truly my own, built on hard-won wisdom and the strength I'd discovered when I needed it most. What happens next? Isabella asked, gesturing to the expanse around us. I smiled, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Whatever I want. That's the beauty of writing your own story. You get to decide how it continues. If you found satisfaction in watching Lucia reclaim her power and build a new life on her own terms, hit that subscribe button. There are more stories of resilience and justice waiting for you, completely free.